Good afternoon. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Northern Spotlights, the Vancouver Aquarium program that takes you north with some of our staff who have traveled up to the Arctic. I'm your host, Keely Langford, and joining me today is Diving Safety Officer Jeremy Heywood. How are you doing today, Jeremy?
I'm very well, Keely. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited to introduce you. After all, you are our diving safety officer. You help ensure that 40 divers that average about 3 dives a day stay safe. I'm one of them, so thanks for that.
That's right.
Much appreciated. And you've been here at the Vancouver Aquarium for a combined 11 years. But you haven't just been here. You've lived and worked in the Bahamas. And rather recently, you've traveled to the colder Arctic. Some extremes, Jeremy.
That's right. Yeah, well, like to try all the different oceans on the planet.
Well, you might as well as a diver. So then, Jeremy, what was your very first ocean dive?
Well, I learned to dive back in the 80s, believe it or not, and I learned to dive in freshwater. So my first ocean dive was actually in British Columbia when I moved out here for a job. I did my very first ocean dive in Seashelt Inlet, just north of Vancouver. Nice.
And so did you imagine that you'd make a career out of diving?
Well, I hope to. Yes, indeed, I did. I hope to do so. Jacques Cousteau was my hero, as he was for, I'm sure, lots of people. So this
especially
is
lots
indeed
of people. Especially lots of people who work here.
That's right.
It's true. And before diving in the Arctic, what was the coldest dive you'd ever done?
Well, I've done a little bit of diving in Alaska as well,
okay.
and that was pretty chilly. Well, I thought it was pretty chilly. It got down to about 4 degrees Celsius. So that was the coldest before we went up to the Arctic.
And when you were in the Arctic, what was your coldest dive there?
It was below zero. It was about minus 1.4 and a bit below 0 degrees Celsius.
That sounds rather comfortable. Definitely an interesting experience. In fact, we have a video that we might be able to show you, we might be able to show our audience that helps walk through what those Arctic dives were like for the team. And Jeremy, can you tell us a little bit more about this video and what's going on?
Sure, I can. Yeah, the video was taken as part of our most recent trip up there. So it's sort of the highlights. So as we get going, I can tell you what we're doing. Well, first of all, you can see that we're getting all geared up in our nice warm clothes. That's one of the most important things about diving in the Arctic is
that looks like lots of layers.
Indeed. And we're going to talk, I think, a little bit about logistics later on. But that's the very small boat that we managed to secure for doing some dives up there. Ordinarily, perhaps a slightly larger boat for us, but we were lucky enough to get that little boat, and then looking out into Cambridge Bay itself. So now we're.
So that's where your boat is headed currently.
That is where we started from. And we left from the hamlet of Cambridge Bay out into the waters of Cambridge Bay.
That makes sense.
So yeah, just traveling out to the dive site now. You can see it was quite a nice day, and what we call a back roll entry into the water. So,
all right.
Get your first glimpse of underwater Arctic if you've never been there in this video.
Well, I have not, so this is pretty exciting.
Indeed, it was exciting for me too. So this was actually my first trip up to the Arctic, so very interesting. Yeah.
And so you're going down there with Danny Kent, is that who's in the video as well behind us?
Yeah, that was Danny rolling into the water off our little boat, indeed.
Okay.
Yes. So now you can see some of the interesting marine life there, some anemones. And this dive that you're looking at right now was a surprise to us because we didn't know that wall was there. So yeah, we're swimming along and looking for a mud flat, and then all of a sudden there was a steep drop-off cliff. So that was a fabulous surprise for us.
Nooks and crannies for some pretty interesting animals.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do we? Yes. So and these are those animals in those nooks and crannies on the walls, indeed. So, quite a few animals that you might see around here in British Columbia. So similar types of animals, similar species, but also some things we hadn't seen. Now we're looking at a lion's mane jelly that you would see around here as well. Again, not sure if it's the same species, but quite an interesting sighting. As we get closer to it in the video here, you'll see that there are actually some hitchhikers on the jelly's bell. Those little whitish dots are actually amphipods that hitchhike on that.
So like little bug-like things?
Yeah, little
Sure.
Little bug-like things, hitching a ride on a bigger non-bug-like thing.
So. I've never seen that before. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, indeed. That's how they get around.
Did you guys follow that jelly for a while?
A little bit, yeah. You want to be careful too, because they do have stingers, or they do have stinging cells on the very long, almost invisible tentacles. So you want to stay clear of those.
All right, stay safe. Yes.
Indeed. So this was probably one of my favorite things here. A big, giant swarm or mass of small jellies. This is my buddy Mackenzie Neal, who I think you've spoken to as well. Just in awe of the millions, literally millions of jellies floating around in the water there. Everywhere we went, there were millions and millions of jellies in the water.
That must be pretty cool. What would you compare it to?
Perhaps a galaxy of stars or something science fiction-y like that. It really looked like a galaxy of jellies, yeah.
So it's like you were a diving astronaut. No, you're not going to go with me on that one. But still, that's how I'm going to imagine it.
Okay.
Because it does. Indeed. It looks pretty cool.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, absolutely. So where are we now? We're going through what's called a Halocline. You just saw the water was a little bit kind of hazy there. That wasn't the camera out of focus. That's going from fresher water into salter, more salty water, and it forms a hazy layer. So that was all over the place. And then we went down a little bit of a slope, and we found some soft corals. Yes, coral in the Arctic. So there were some quite beautiful soft corals. Small, but my sort of guess would be they get much larger as you go deeper down into the water too. So.
How deep did you go on these?
This was our maximum depth was 100 feet, about 30 meters. That was about the maximum depth.
Right.
And the maximum coldness as well. So that is not an animal that you see there. Of course, that is a snowmobile that accidentally sank to the bottom of the ocean.
How did it end up there?
Well, someone I think was trying to drive it between two ice floes with water in between and didn't quite make it all the way. So, not something to take lightly up there with water that's 0 degrees Celsius.
Right, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And so just sort of a little overview now of what the general environment looked like on most of our dives, and then coming up through the surface of the water to see our trusty boat there waiting to pick us up. And that's obviously, for those of you that have been watching, a different boat than the one we went in off. This is a bit of a highlight reel of all the dives we did. So if you noticed that, good for you.
Oh, look at that. But we got to go diving in the Arctic with Jeremy. You literally took us there. That's
Indeed.
pretty nice of you, Jeremy. Yeah. That looks pretty impressive. So a lot of different highlights there. But what was the first dive specifically like for you?
Well, the very first dive was actually right off the dock at Cambridge Bay. We waded in. Sorry, it wasn't off the dock. It was beside the dock. We waded in from the beach and swam out to the dock and swam around the dock. The water was cold, so that was I was expecting that. There was an amazing sort of forest of anemones, of burrowing anemones. Nice. That was quite interesting. And also lots of human debris that perhaps I wasn't so surprised about, because even here there's lots of human debris around docks. But here's a photo, the previous photo there, of some debris that we found off the dock. But here is the more sort of lovely forest of anemones. And perhaps if you remember from the video, as you swim past those, they all pull down into their tubes quite dramatically to protect themselves. So
definitely seems like a memorable first dive. And we addressed the fact that the divers were wearing lots of layers, you yourself. So what sort of preparation do you need to dive in water that cold?
Well, yeah, like you hit the key point, which is lots of warm layers. So the water is very cold. So first of all, we need to stay dry. So we wear what's called a dry suit that keeps us dry. And underneath that dry suit, we wear a varying number of warm, fleecy, fuzzy clothes. In this case, we were lucky enough to have some electrically heated jackets that were sort of literally and figuratively a lifesaver up there, because they kept us very nice and cozy warm. So. And
I know divers have lots of different kinds of gear. When I have wet gloves, what kind of gloves did you, where my hands will get wet in the water?
Right. So,
but you guys...
Well, actually, some folks did. A couple of us had wet gloves, not
really?
me. I had dry gloves that keep your hands dry. But now that you mention it, my dry gloves actually became semi-wet gloves on one of the dives. And I had a very tiny leak on the outside edge of one of my gloves. And it really made me realize how cold the water was. Because as a very tiny trickle of water trickled in and soaked my inner glove, my fingers froze solid one at a time. So as the water moved across soaked across my gloves. My fingers just froze solid, totally useless to me, unable to move them or feel them. So it really brought home how cold the water was outside of my protective shell that I was wearing.
That's pretty impressive. You put up with that. I have to remember my first ocean dive, my dry suit leaked like nobody's business, and I immediately headed back to the surface because it was quite uncomfortable for me. And that's right here in BC, where the water was like 10, 12 degrees, something like that. Jer, it sounds like you didn't immediately head back up to the surface.
No, well, yeah, and in fact, if it had been anything other than a tiny leak in my hand, it would have been definitely a reason to end the dive, because the dive was shallow. It was actually on that very first dive at the dock. And it was just my hand. I made the decision that I could continue on for a little bit longer. So, but ordinarily, if you have a bigger leak in a more vital part of your equipment, that would be cause to end the dive. Absolutely.
All right, but it's essentially this man had his water in his hand in freezing cold water for about 45 minutes and didn't head back on up. Does anyone here think that they'd be able to keep their hand in icy water for 45 minutes?
Well, one fellow over there thinks he could do it. Yeah.
Yes, a staff member.
Oh.
I gotta say hey, there we go. We've got another visitor who says yes. Most of the other visitors are saying no, Jer.
Yeah.
They're with me on this one.
It was pretty cold.
So it sounds like there's a lot of logistical hurdles one has to overcome to make this kind of trip. So were you logistics man? Well,
yeah, it certainly assisted to a great degree with planning the trip in advance. Trips to the Arctic take a lot of planning and need to be, the planning needs to start months in advance, even years if possible. So yes, I was helping out the rest of the team here at the Aquarium do some of the planning for shipping equipment up there and booking hotels and places to stay, sorting out how we'd get around when we were up there. We had to rent a truck, things like that. So pretty basic logistics that are pretty easy in a big city, but become much more complicated in a small town in the Arctic.
So did you send stuff ahead of time?
Well, we did indeed. Yes, we sent up some extra scuba equipment, some more scuba tanks, various pieces, spare parts, and some other of our research gear. We sent up some big coolers of equipment in advance because we wanted to be ready and have it there when we arrived, so that we wouldn't have to take so much with us.
So what happened when you arrived?
It didn't. We sent it up about a month in advance, and when we got there, it wasn't there.
Oh.
So we checked every day at the airport to see if it had arrived. We phoned various people every day to see if it was coming, and we were assured every day that it would be there. And it actually did arrive. It was great. It arrived on the flight that we left on. So. Yeah.
All right. That certainly sounds a little bit tough. But you were able to overcome it, do some incredible dives. So what was the most memorable part of diving in the Arctic for you?
Well, I think really all the jellies were the most memorable part. I've never seen so many jellies, literally millions and millions of jellies. Right. That was the most memorable part for me.
In fact, we have a question from the audience. Hunter from Whitecourt, Alberta, wants to know if you've had close encounters with any Arctic animals.
Well, lots of small animals, absolutely. Invertebrates, jellies, crabs, lots of things like that. But certainly no encounters with large, charismatic megafauna like polar bears or narwhals or anything like that. So that would be wonderful to have that experience, but not on this trip, maybe on future trips.
But you did encounter some other animals. So what was the highlight of your trip that wasn't necessarily diving specific?
Well, when I'm not diving, I love bird watching and taking photos. So it's a great spot to do that in the Arctic. And we were lucky enough to have one of our dive sites was right underneath a peregrine falcon nesting spot. So we were able to get a good close-up view of couple of adult peregrine falcons and a juvenile. So that was a real highlight for me, to see those guys in the wild.
It's true. Yeah. In other situations, Jeremy will tell you a lot more about that. But what's next for your team in the Arctic, Jeremy?
Well, hopefully we're going up again next year and for years to come to continue with the work that we started this year in the Arctic. Yes.
And I bet you get to do a lot of planning for that again.
I'll probably be right in it again for planning. I hope to go again, but we do try to send various team members. But I'll certainly be involved in the planning with a hope to go again.
All right. Well, best of luck to you with that, Jeremy, and of course to the rest of the Vancouver Aquarium team. Thanks again so much for joining us. This is Jeremy Heywood. He is the diving safety officer here at the Vancouver Aquarium, and he's joined us as part of our Northern Spotlights talk show, the program that takes us north with Vancouver Aquarium. We actually have interviewed a number of different staff members, and all of these videos are available on the Vancouver Aquarium YouTube channel, and you should definitely check for new ones, as there will be a new one added even tomorrow. So keep checking back for that. And if you'd like to learn more about what the Vancouver Aquarium is doing in the Arctic, some of the projects that Jeremy was part of, you can feel free to visit the website vanaqua.org/OurNorth. But on behalf of myself, Keely, thanks again so much, everyone, for joining us, and have a fantastic rest of your day.